You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. Whether it's for food, fuel, drinks, or snacks, about half of the U.S. population shops at a convenience store every day. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
You know, Donovan, liquid fuels continue to be the primary source of power for transportation in the United States. Yet there's a lot of things happening in the liquid fuels market. And we're looking at, increased biofuels, maybe E15, B20, those type of things. We're going to talk today about where the market is, what we're dealing with, what we're looking at, and what programs may exist to help retailers get into the biofuels market. Welcome to Convenience Matters, everybody. This is John Eichberger with NACS and the Fuels Institute, and I am joined today by my co-host,
Donovan Woods.
And we are joined today by Christy Moriarty from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. Christy, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So tell us a little bit, what is the National Renewable Energy Laboratory? A lot of our listeners may have no clue what you guys do.
Well, Department of Energy has a number of laboratories across the country that do research and development. We're not policymakers in any way. And the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, as its name invokes, is focused on things like wind power and solar power. And we have a biosciences center, a bioenergy center, and a transportation center to do a lot of research into these alternative fuels and engine research to get to a place where we hopefully have some cleaner burning fuels.
I mean, over the years, Donovan, I've relied on NREL, it's the short name for it, for so many insights into what we're doing. And I'm thrilled that Christy joined our board of advisors last year to help bring that knowledge from NREL and the Department of Energy Laboratories to the Fuels Institute proceedings. So again, I really appreciate everything you guys do. Now, we're talking today about biofuels. So you've been working in the biofuel space for a long time. But what are the things that you're seeing in the market and what you guys are working on right now that seem to be the top issues for the biofuels market as we go forward?
Right. I wouldn't say it was so much issues, but it did take time, especially to go from E10 to E15, to do all of the testing necessary to do it legally. And also, it's a lot of education for retailers. The EPA's Office of Underground Storage Tanks, they updated their code about 3 years ago, I believe. Mm-hmm. So all the things that it takes to be able to do that legally. Same with biodiesel, but that's more of a fleet fuel, whereas we see the ethanol as more of a consumer fuel. So it takes just a little bit more effort to get there. And especially with E15, there was a pretty significant limiting factor with Reid vapor pressure. It's just a fuel property. But what that did was make it so some retail stations could only offer it part of the year, and consumers don't know about wintertime and summertime fuel. Right. And that could have been confusing to consumers, but now that barrier has gone away, and I expect in the next year, if it makes sense for a station financially, and they think they can make better margins or make some money off the fuel, we'll probably see it in parts of the country where we haven't seen it before, and some different retailers getting into that market space.
Yeah, somebody asked me earlier this summer in an interview I was doing, because the administration approved the sale of E15 year-round around April or May of 2019. And there was a lot of expectation that more and more retailers would start rushing into the E15 space. And the question to me was, I haven't really seen that happen. And my comment was, well, the approval for summertime sales came right before summer. What we'll likely see is that might remove a barrier to retailers getting into that space over time. But not everybody was ready to just jump into the market right when that happened. So it's going to take a little bit of time for them to move in. But do you anticipate, from what you're hearing in the market, we're going to see more E15 in the market over the next couple of years?
I do. In discussion with retailers, such as the NACS show and in other meetings throughout the years, they've definitely asked a lot of questions, and they said they've been evaluating it. But what was holding them back was not being able to sell it all year. Mm-hmm. And as you said, the approval came, I think, 3 days before summertime fuel sales.
Not a lot of time to change your marketing strategy.
No, and it might have been okay for those stations that were already selling E15 to maybe think that was coming through. For those stations that weren't already selling it, they're just going to need time to get there, and we're waiting to hear that decision. And now we have that decision, so I think in the next year we could expect to see more.
This is a topic that, for the consumer, isn't as flashy, isn't as shiny as, let's say, an alternative fuel like electric vehicles. When it comes to this, how do you actually educate a consumer as to what they're putting in their car? When they see a EV, that they know what it is. They know it's electric, it's different, it's cool, it's always on the news. This isn't so much something they understand. Does it matter to consumers? Is that even part of the equation when it comes to putting this into your station?
Yeah, I think with consumers, some read the pump labels, but many more do not. I think stations that are selling the fuel are going to want to keep some brochures and some information. The dispenser itself is already pretty busy. I don't think it needs to be out there. Some consumers might care, others might not. I think a fair amount of consumers would be surprised to learn that most of the fuel in the U.S. is 10% ethanol. Because really at the 15% level, at least from the federal government standpoint and the definitions, it's not considered an alternative fuel. At that level, it would be considered an additive, an octane enhancer.
So you've done a lot of work, and you and I talked about this a lot, about figuring out what the compatibility of the infrastructure is. And I know when E15 was first approved, Donovan, NACS is very concerned. How do we move forward to ensure that all retailers know they have to have compatible infrastructure? What infrastructure is available? Can you kind of walk through some of the research you guys have done and you personally have done to try to help us understand what can we use, what can't we use, what should marketers be looking for in terms of, if I want to get into E15, how do I know if I have compatible equipment?
Right. Over time, we've done a lot of testing at UL laboratories, and there's been updates to their standards over time. And to get that third-party listed equipment for the fuel being dispensed is really important for anything the consumer might touch. So the nozzle and the dispenser. For the underground, that one's a little more interesting because it could be third-party listed, or you can have a letter from the refueling equipment manufacturer stating that it's compatible, just to acknowledge that a lot of that equipment, like tanks, may be in the ground for 30 or 50 years. And then what we've done at the lab also, in addition to a lot of that testing and also a lot of testing with elastomers and also with ultra-low sulfur diesel, there's just been a need for upgraded materials. And that also makes the equipment last longer. So there's some other benefits to that too. But over time, we've just worked towards providing information for stations, especially through the handbook for storing and dispensing E85 and other blends, to have the appendices of all the equipment manufacturers, parts and model numbers, and what they're compatible with. Now, a station may have records of their equipment. If they don't have records, they're going to have to pay a jobber or somebody to come in there and assess their equipment, because that is a requirement to show that your equipment at your station is compatible. Every station is going to be different. Some things are going to have to be replaced to meet it, to do it legally, to do it safely. So we've been more focused because we're past the research on that. We've gotten to where we understand what's compatible, what isn't, and making sure we're communicating that out to stations that want it. Anytime we hear from a station that's interested, or ownership group, or a petroleum marketer, we get that document out to them.
Is that going to require them, this is just me not knowing this, for that station owner who doesn't know as well, they have to actually go in and break concrete, something like that? Is it that heavy of a requirement in terms of moving out a whole storage tank and put it in something different, or is it a little bit less than that?
Oh, for figuring out your equipment, no, there's a lot of ways with cameras and people who are very experienced over time. They can say, oh, I know what tank that is, or ball valve float, or all this other equipment that you might see there. But really getting to that point of knowing, no, with breaking concrete, yes, some stations, if they want to do it and they only have 3 tanks and they're selling premium, regular, and diesel, they're going to have to add a tank. And there have been programs both under Department of Energy's Clean Cities and also with the USDA's Biofuels Infrastructure Partnership that have provided funding to help make that possible, acknowledging it is very expensive and time-consuming and disruptive to a store to add a tank.
So let's talk a little bit about that USDA program, because a lot of the infrastructure installations that have been made or retrofits have been made to allow E15 to be sold have been done with some sort of support. And the USDA biofuels implementation program was one of the major components of that. Can you kind of walk us through a little bit what that program was?
Sure. It was $100 million in funding from USDA, and it was matched by $110 million from industry partners and distributed through states. So the states actually had to apply. It wasn't the stations. And then the grant money flowed from different state agencies to station groups. Ultimately, they had hoped to do 1,400 stations. It looks like it's going to be, the final number will be closer to 900. And some of that was some states decided they just didn't have the capacity to do it. It was initially 21 states, and in the end it was 18 states. A couple of states gave back money because they just weren't able to either find enough participants, or again, some of the states with their budgets and their time of year didn't have the capacity,
I'm thinking
to get that out.
That's got to be unprecedented that a state gave the federal government money back.
I'm not aware of other times, but yes, it did occur. It was more USDA rolls the money out to the states over time, so they might not have taken what they were awarded when it was initially announced, but it's about 3,500 dispensers were funded, 100 and maybe 90 tanks. And the reason there wasn't that many tanks is most of the participating stations had 200 stores or more, and they tended to have 5 tanks at the station. So they didn't need another tank to be able to offer E15 and or E85.
Yeah, and to your question, Donovan, most of the tanks in the market, steel tanks, I think since 1980 have been certified as compatible. I think fiberglass tanks since like 86 or 80 or something like that. There's several resources, and I'll ask you to give us where they can find the NREL resource, but the Petroleum Equipment Institute has a listing of letters submitted by manufacturers testifying to which of their devices and their equipment is compatible, that they certify as compatible to satisfy the EPA requirement. And then there was a session at the PEI show here at the NAC show where Underwriters Laboratories talked about a new tool that they just put on their website to make it easier to find out if your equipment is listed for E25, E40 is a new listing, E85, B5, B20, or B99. So we're starting to see greater opportunity to determine whether your equipment is compatible before you make the decision. Because once you hire an engineer to come out and check your stuff, you're already spending money. So this is a way you can kind of do a quick check to see if you think you might be in the right position.
So why would a station owner want to do this? What's the incentive for them? Are their customers demanding it? Is it more of an environment thing? What's the incentive for someone to actually go through that effort and make this decision?
Typically, the margins can be better on fuels that aren't red, right? There's a lot of competition, right, with just regular unleaded fuel, 87, and they might be able to make a little bit more money. And of course, markets are always going to be changing, but the past several years, ethanol has been quite a bit cheaper than the main gasoline component. So it's just another opportunity to perhaps make a better profit. And also, some stations want to differentiate themselves. And
more offerings.
Yeah, we collected a lot of data under the USDA BIP program, and we're seeing who's putting it on signs. I think for E15, 47% of those stations are putting it on their sign. And if it's a lower price, that might motivate consumers not only to purchase gas there, but also to go into the shop. So there could be just some market reasons where it may make sense. Some communities are a lot more familiar with ethanol, like where it's produced in Midwestern states.
A lot of them, Donovan, you're selling an 88 octane fuel, usually for less than you're selling 87. So you're establishing that relationship with the customer. Now, for the listeners, you have to understand, EPA approves the sale of E15 for a vehicle to manufactured model year 2001 or newer.
Yeah.
So that's your limitation on the legal side. Yet the OEMs didn't start warranting their automobiles until after E15 was approved in 2011. So about 95% of the vehicles on the road are considered 2001 or newer. Not all the vehicles are warranted or listed in their owner's manuals as being approved for E15, Doesn't mean you're going to have failures, but it also means that there's a disconnect between what the OEMs say and what the EPA says. Let's shift gears a little bit, because you've also done some research on biodiesel.
Yes.
And we know it's more of a commercial grade fuel, but what are we seeing in the biodiesel, renewable diesel space happening in the market right now?
With biodiesel, it still remains a fuel that's at private fleet stations. There's just not a lot is made available to consumers, even though consumers have a pretty positive view of biodiesel and might want to see more of it. But also there hasn't been that growth in the light-duty diesel market to really justify having more of it at a retail station. In terms of research, we established compatibility long ago, and it's a little bit different because you can use up to B20 in the conventional equipment below the ground at the station, because EPA determined that there just weren't compatibility issues at that level. And a lot of the biodiesel that might be for sale in the market is a 5% or maybe an 11% in some states that are motivated to have that level and make some financial incentives for that to occur. Certainly, renewable diesel has been the hotter topic lately because it meets the ASTM, the fuel quality spec for regular diesel. So that takes away a lot of the maybe concerns that the station may have. That also tends to be a fleet fuel. It's produced largely in the U.S. and Louisiana. We still import it as well from Singapore. And it goes 99% to the California market because they are able to pay the highest price for the fuel. But definitely at NREL, we field a lot of inquiries of interest of other states that they'd like to use the fuel as well. And we're seeing a lot of growth in the existing facilities at more than doubling their capacity. And then we're even seeing oil companies going to convert maybe an older oil refinery to just produce renewable diesel. So I think we'll continue to see more of that in the market, but it will continue to go to California because the demand's not satisfied there yet. They have mandates with their state fleet vehicles. They use it in ferries.
Satisfies credits for the low carbon fuel standard. It gets extra credits for cap and trade. So there's a ton of economic incentives to ship renewable diesel into California. So yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I guess that would say if you are a different state and you're calling, is that so that you can get more business coming through your area with the heavy duty fleets, or is it any other benefits as to why they will be investigating that?
Well, and some of it comes from the Clean Cities program, which is a coalition that's all over the country, and there's it's a public-private partnership. So sometimes it can be the really big fleets that are moving products that are very familiar to you at the convenience store, like sodas, and they find that to be an interesting fuel, and they've seen the engine research, and so sometimes they wonder, okay, well, in these other markets, is there any chance for us to get the fuel there? And I think eventually it's just taking time for that to ramp up. It started really small, but so far things have gone really well. We have not fielded any complaints. We get complaints about all sorts of stuff. If something happens with natural gas cylinder or something, we'll hear about that. But the rollout of renewable diesel, it's gone well. We just haven't instead of fielding complaints, it's more, hey, where can we buy that? When can we get that for our fleet?
One of the things I like about NREL, Donovan, is they're objective. You're not a stakeholder. You're not trying to sell something. You're not trying to push something. You're doing an analysis. You're doing assessments and research to help educate the market. For our listeners who may want to learn a little bit more about the research you've done, where can they go to find out some of the publications that NREL has put together?
The best spot would be the Alternative Fuels Data Center. So that's afdc.energy.gov. And that would have all of the information on any fuel that is considered an alternative fuel by the federal government, but it includes E15 too. So you have the different ethanol blends, biodiesel, renewable diesel, sustainable aviation fuel,
electric charging station locations.
That's probably the most popular. That's probably the most popular tool on the website right now. Any station out there selling an alternative fuel can find themselves on that mapping application that we have. It's also a phone app, but propane and natural gas too, hydrogen. We just try to cover anything that isn't conventional petroleum and gasoline and just get all the information out there, laws, incentives.
Well, Christy, thank you for joining us, and thank you guys for listening to Convenience Matters. Remember, if you're interested in alternative fuel, find the objective resources, find the data, find the information, become informed, and make right decisions. Thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next time on Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.